Welcome to the Pampered Thoughts podcast, where we are inspiring and encouraging women to love themselves as they are without shame or guilt, focusing on topics such as self-love, marriage and family, balance in life and business, and all things woman. Every week, we'll share inspirational topics that focus on helping you to overcome your struggles and limitations with lack of identity, low self-esteem, self-love, confidence, and so much more. I'm your host, Veronica, a wife, mom, speaker, entrepreneur, and more importantly, a daughter of the King. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Pampered Thoughts podcast. I'm your host, Veronica, and I thank you all so much for returning. If you're new here, thank you for popping in, and I pray that this show will be a blessing for you. Today, we are going to be talking about you are doing too much. That's right. The topic today is you're doing too much. And let me explain why this topic came about. This topic came to me I think about maybe a year or a little bit more ago. And my husband and I, we were at a hotel. He had gone off for a training, so he wasn't in the room with me. I was in the room by myself, just waiting for him to finish his training and just kind of just relaxing and doing what I do. So I heard a family that either were checking into their room or they were checking out of their room. All I know is that they were moving their suitcases. And all I could hear was a young boy. He was maybe, I'll say 6 or 7. The little girl, his little sister, sounded like maybe she was 5. Maybe the boy could have been 9 or 10. I don't know. I don't know their ages, but I could tell there was a difference in the age. And all I could hear was the boy saying, "Stop, stop." And then I would hear the little girl say, "I want to help. I'm trying to help." And she would just be whining, and he would say, "Stop, move out of the way. Stop, move out of the way." And here she is, "I'm trying to help. I want to help. I want to help." And then the boy got frustrated and he said, "Stop it. Your help is not helping me." And she kind of, got upset and walked away, I guess, or she got quiet. I didn't hear her anymore, so I don't know exactly where she went or what she did. But the thought came to me, and I feel like the Father revealed to me, sometimes in our life, our help is not helping Him. Have you ever, and I'm sure you have, at a point you've received a promise from God? You've received a promise that maybe you were going to get a house. Maybe you had a financial blessing coming. Maybe you were going to do something successful in your business, or you were going to get a promotion on your job, or there was some type of promise that you received from God. Maybe in your prayer time, maybe you received a prophetic word. There was something that you received, and you knew in your ability, your natural ability, that it wasn't possible. So you accepted that promise, you accepted that word or what have you, and you continued about your day. I think of this story because sometimes we can receive a promise from God, and because we're waiting and that promise may seem like it's taking too long, and then we begin to try to help God. We begin to try to help Him to help that promise come along because we start waiting. And sometimes God's promises can take a month, a week, a year, or sometimes multiple years for it to come to pass. And we get tired of waiting, right? It makes me think about the story of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. And if you're familiar with that story, I'll just give a little small tidbit. God had gave a promise to Abraham and Sarah that they would have a son. They would have a child. And Abraham received that promise. Sarah, on the other hand, she kind of, in her mind, she laughed because the Lord asked her, "Why are you laughing?" She said, "I didn't laugh." He said, "You did laugh." And She laughed because she knew and she thought in her mind that I'm too old. Abraham is too old. How in the world are we going to have a child? You're promising us a child, and that our child is going to be the inheritor, and he's going to be at the start of a full nation of people. How is that possible when we are super old, right? And so while they were waiting on that promise, Sarah got tired of waiting. She didn't want to wait anymore. And so what happened with Sarah is that she had a handmaiden named Hagar. Sarah got tired of waiting on that promise that God had given to her, and she began to ask and tell Abraham, I'm going to give you Hagar so that you can have this son that God has promised us through Hagar, because I'm barren. I'm not having any children. Long story short, Abraham had the son with Hagar, and things didn't go well. Hagar began to despise Sarah, and Hagar began to treat her differently once she became pregnant and she found out she was having a son. The Bible says that she despised her, which that term means she became trifling to her, of no value, invaluable, right? And because she found out that she was pregnant, she started to treat Sarah differently. Now, Sarah was the one who gave her, Abraham was the one who gave her a son, and she started to treat Sarah wrong because she felt like Sarah's not having any kids. She's of no value to Abraham, right? She became kind of uppity, I guess you could say. And so Sarah regretted the whole decision, because now I've given this woman over to you. She's treating me wrong, and everything was just messed up. And so how many times in our life where we try to help God fulfill a promise? God tells you, hey, you're going to be getting married, you're going to have children, and because it didn't happen this year, because it didn't happen next year, because it didn't happen the following year, because I'm still waiting and it's years have gone by, you begin to try to find your own husband. And the Bible says that he who finds a wife finds a good thing. So you begin to date, you begin to do things that are not beneficial to your walk with God, right? Because now you've gotten frustrated and you start ignoring red flags for people that you're dating because they look good, because they may have a good job, because they may look like and embody those things that you feel you should have, but it may not be the right guy that God has for you, right? So you begin to mess things up, get in relationships that this guy may be abusive. He may be abusive verbally, maybe physically. He may be a player. He may be everything that you do not want in a man, because you're sitting there and you're trying to help God fulfill the promise that he gave to you. And God doesn't need our help. All he needs for us to do is just trust him and be obedient to what he's calling us to do. And so as I was in that hotel room and I heard that the little boy and the little girl going through their little scuffle back and forth, sometimes we can scuffle with God. Sometimes we can get so frustrated and get so mad with God because he's taking too long or he's moving too slow. He's not moving fast enough for us. And we begin to mess things up. Just like Sarah messed things up. She was upset because now Hagar was treating her like she was a nobody. Hagar was treating her like she didn't care anything about her. And so she ended up kicking her out. But she ended up having to come back, right? And so the thing about us waiting on God and trying not to help God is we just have to maintain and trust in his promises. Sometimes we could be so in a rush to reach the finish line and because in our eyes, things aren't going the way they should go. But we know that God knows all, he sees all. We can be begin to get frustrated or annoyed. And when things don't work out, sometimes we end up getting mad at God. When God wasn't the one that told you to go ahead and take that job because it's a higher pay. But now you're dealing with a ton of stress and a ton of envy and jealousy and just things that a toxic work environment, because you felt like, oh, this is what he was been telling me, I was going to get that promotion on my job. Now I got that promotion, but you didn't wait to see, Father, is this the promotion for me? Because sometimes what can happen is the enemy can send imposters, right? He can send and he can put a thought in your head that he knows that God is giving you this promise. And so he can send things that may look like it could be the promise of God, but it's a complete imposter. And that's where we have to increase in our discernment of what it is that God has for us to do, what it is that God has us looking for. And when it comes to his promise, because God is not going to bless us and add sorrow with it. He blesses us, but there's never any sorrow to the blessings that he gives to us. And so the thing with waiting on the promises of God is that we have to also recognize when the enemy could send an imposter. Like I mentioned about, if you've received a promise of marriage, the enemy knows what you like. He knows who you think is fine. He knows what you're looking for in a man. So he's going to send what you deem to be the perfect guy, to look like an imposter. But then once you get entangled with that person, you find out that this is not the blessing. This is not the promise that God has promised me, because I shouldn't feel like this. I shouldn't have to go through this. This is not the promise that God has for me, right? Or in the case of Sarah and Abraham, they're waiting for a child, but God didn't tell them to go get Hagar. He said that that child was going to come from their loins. And eventually that child did come from their loins. But because of Sarah's impatience, she went and got Hagar. And it made her deal with things where she was upset, she was angry, she ended up treating Hagar wrong. Just things were not beneficial for her while she was waiting on that promise that God had given to her, right? And so sometimes when we're in the process and we're waiting on that promise for the Most High, we have to also pray and ask for discernment. We have to trust that his promises will not return back void to him, right? When he speaks a word and he gives a word, his words are not going to return void. His words are not going to fall to the ground. And we have to stand on those words to know that, Father, what you promised me, I know that you promised me a husband. I know that you promised me a better job. I know that you promised me a promotion. I know that you promised me children. I know that you promised me a business of my own. I know that you promised me that I would travel more to do missions and serve people, and even in my own community that I will help more people. I know that you've promised me these things, and I'm going to stand on your word. I'm going to trust in your promises. And so these are a few things that I wanted to a few tips or helpful suggestions that I wanted to give you while waiting on the promise of God, right? Because we know that his promises are always going to be yes and amen. They're always going to be true to the character of the Most High. And the first thing is trust his promise. Trust his promise. You know that when he speaks, nothing falls to the ground. So trust his promise. The second thing is don't try to figure out how it's going to happen. I know for myself, a lot of times I try to figure out how things is going to happen because I'm a step-by-step person. So if you give me this step, I want to know once this step ends, what's the next step, right? And I'm sure some of you may be like that as well, where you think that, or you may see what step you're on, whether, you have to take school or whatever the case may be in your situation. You figure out what that first step is. Now you're trying to figure out what that second step is. And the Most High doesn't always show us each step. Even as he told Abraham to get up and leave, go ahead and move away from your family. Go to a place and I'll tell you where. He didn't know where he was going. And the Father didn't tell him the next step. He just said, get up and go. And so sometimes the Father will give us the first step. And while we're on that first step, we need to be obedient to that first step. We don't have to try to figure out what's going to happen next or try to figure out how to make the promise happen. If Yah gave you a promise and it appears to be too hard for you to accomplish in your own natural ability, that means he's not looking for you to figure things out. Because a lot of times in our own logic, we mess things up. So don't try to figure things out. Just be okay in the step that you're in the wait that you're in while you're waiting for his promise to come to pass. The third thing is don't lose faith, because sometimes his promises can take years to come to fruition. But we have to keep believing that he's not like man. He sees all. He knows our beginning from our end. He knows everything about us. And so because he knows everything about us, because he was the one who created us, because he is the one who helps us along our day-to-day living, we can just keep that faith that he's going to do what he promised. And I'll give a little story about myself and my husband. We received a prophecy from a lady. We do not know who she was. She was a guest speaker at our church at the time. This was years ago. And she prophesied to us that we had a house coming and that we had been looking for a house, but we just hadn't found anything that was good for us. Our kids were young at the time. We didn't find anything that we felt was what we wanted. And so we just put on hold, and we were like, not looking for a house anymore, because the houses that we were finding were not good. They were just, nothing was right. So we stopped looking. And she prophesied to us that the house was coming. And now I'm kind of sitting there like how Sarah was when God promised her a son. And I'm sitting there like, well, now, we need the money, the credit. Things just wasn't looking in our favor. And I'm thinking this in my head, but she prophesied and she said, your house is coming. And as soon as I said, well, what about the money and the and the credit? She said, and God said to don't worry about the money and to don't worry about the credit. And I knew when she said that she was hearing from God, because that's what I was thinking in my head. Like, that's not going to happen right now, right? But I still kept that word in the back of my heart. But I was like, I'm not looking for a house. I'm just waiting. We're just going to wait. We're just going to do what we need to do in the meantime. But I always kept that word in the back of my head. And long story short, few years down the line, actually, I think it might have been maybe 9 or 10 years that had passed. Maybe a little bit shorter than that, maybe 7 years, if I remember correctly. But we ended up getting our house. We felt this strong urge to go start looking for a house again. And we did that. We started looking for a house again, found the perfect neighborhood, perfect house was being built. Actually, was already built and finished. It was contracted to someone else, but their contract fell through. And in that process of us getting this home, we did not have to worry about our credit. We did not have to worry about the money, because everything came through successfully. Everything, the promise that the Father had given us had come through. And because of that, that taught me a lesson in trusting God's promises, not losing the faith, because even though his promise may be taking a while, you continue to believe and have faith that he said he was going to do it. So I'm going to just stand and I'm going to wait. And if you're waiting on a promise right now that you haven't seen come to pass yet, and you're still believing God, whether that's to be married, to have a child, doesn't matter how old you are. Just like Sarah, she was way up there in her 90s. If the Father has promised you a child, whether you're 40 or 50, you will have a child in His timing, because He's going to make sure everything is taken care of, that everything goes smoothly with that labor and that delivery. But whatever it is, whether you may not be looking for a marriage, you may not be looking for a child, whatever it is that God has promised you, whether it's a financial, a breakthrough, whether it's whatever it is, if you have not received it yet and years have gone by, continue to keep the faith. Don't lose faith, because God is not like us. He's not like man. It will come to pass. And while you're waiting, the next step is to stay focused. Continue working on the job that He already has you assigned to. Prepare for the promise. If He's promised you marriage, prepare to be a wife. Get around those who are already married, who have healthy marriages, not toxic marriages, but get around those who are already married, that have been married for some years, or that have maybe just gotten married, but they're a year or two into the process. They can tell you and give you some insight and give you some wisdom about things to prepare to be a wife. Even though everybody's husband is different, but the woman and the wife that you speak with, she'll be able to give you some guidance about how to prepare for being a wife. My husband and I, we got married young. We were 18 when we got married, and we've been together this year to be 26 years. But we've gone through things that someone who's maybe been married for a year or two has not gone through. So it's good to get around those who have already gone to the place or are in the place where you're trying to go, so you can prepare yourself in the meantime. Whether it's pregnancy, begin to become healthier, or work on your body so that your body is able to carry the child that the Father has promised to you. Whether it's a promotion on your job, prepare, learn some new skills and things that you need, or to start a business, begin to read about leadership and running a business. Prepare yourself during the time that you're waiting. That'll take your mind off of the promise and onto bettering yourself, onto working, onto continuing to keep the faith, but it'll keep you occupied during that time. And while you're waiting, stay faithful. Stay faithful while you're waiting, because you're keeping the faith. You also want to stay faithful to Him, because a lot of times when His plans and His promises take longer than we want them to, we start looking for other options, which is a lot of times how people can begin to go off into witchcraft or all these different things. Like if you're believing God for a financial blessing, now you want to go get money soap. And you want to start taking a bath in money soap, believing that money is going to come to you, not realizing, remember I said earlier, that the enemy, he will bring an imposter. He will bring something or someone in your path because he knows you're believing and he knows you're losing the faith. And he knows that all I have to do is just bring this imposter to her and she's going to fall for it. So I'm gonna bring this money soap, or I'm going to bring these love spells, or I'm going to bring something that's going to bring everything that she's looking for in her path, which is all going to be an imposter. Because why? You got it illegally. You got it the wrong way. And then once you get it, you start realizing now you got these demons attached to you. Now you got these things that are happening in your life, and you don't know why your life is upside down. You don't know why you're depressed. You don't know why you're dealing with toxic people, and you're dealing things just in your life have become chaotic. It's because now you've opened yourself up to something that is not of God. And so we have to be careful that while we're in that wait, while we're staying focused, that we also stay faithful. And that was the last tip, is to stay faithful. Stay in your word, stay praying, stay fasting, stay believing, and trusting in the Father. Don't start doing too much. Don't start trying to help God, because like the little boy said, your helping is not helping him. The best thing you can do is just continue working on what step, what assignment the Father already has you on until he gives you the next step. And if it's something that you can't do on your own, just trust and know that he's going to make it the way he wants it to be. He's going to make it get done. So I hope that you all enjoyed this podcast. I, again, thank you all so much for tuning in, for joining. Please go ahead and like and share. If you know somebody who's trying to help God, if you know they're believing God for a promise that he's made to them and it hasn't come to pass, share it with them and let them know that they can receive encouragement during this time. Let them know not to lose the faith and to just share, get the word out. You can still follow us on pamperedthoughts.com, on Instagram at Pampered Thoughts. We are also on YouTube now at Pampered Thoughts. So go and check us out over there and subscribe, because eventually these audio podcasts are going to turn into video podcasts. So make sure you go check us out. Go subscribe at Pampered Thoughts. And the audio is already there, already uploading. But once I begin to do the video podcast, it's going to be great. And it's going to be on YouTube. So go and subscribe to us over on YouTube. And so until next time, stay pampered. Thanks for joining us this week on the Pampered Thoughts podcast. Be sure to visit us at www.pamperedthoughts.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or RSS, so you'll never miss a show. You can also check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Pampered Thoughts, and on Twitter at I Am Pampered. As always, subscribe to the show to catch a new episode every week. And if you found value in the show, please leave a rating on iTunes and tell a friend about us. We want to continue to bring you the episodes you love. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay pampered.